Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of DM's Journal for D&D 5th Edition out of the Abyss campaign. I know it's been a little while since I've uploaded a video, a couple weeks I think, and that's just because my life has been extremely busy lately with lots of commitments and many more to come. So busy, in fact, that I was... myself, because I was unavailable, our crew was unable to play this past Sunday, nor will we be able to play this coming Sunday. Which is too bad, but on the upside, it does give me lots of time to prep, which is good because, as I am going to explain in recapping our session from a couple weeks ago, the crew has finally left Gracklestug and is on to their next location, which I believe is going to be, I think they had decided on Neverlight Grove because they ultimately want to be going to I'm blanking on the name of the Deep Gnome city right now. Blingdenstone. They want to get to Blingdenstone, and Neverlight Grove is on the way. And Stool, their little Myconid companion, is like, "That's my home, and I really just want to go home. And this whole endeavor has been terrible, and please bring me there." So they're like, "Yeah, that's fair. We should kind of drop off the little kid." And on top of that, Seraph, the Drow companion they have, who they're more and more suspecting of like something's up with this dude. He's also just kind of in the word of, the voice of reason, kind of saying, well, it's like almost 20 days or something from here to Blingdenstone. Do you really want to do just a 20-day journey through the Underdark? It'd be good to stop in somewhere. And so the players are kind of like, yeah, that makes sense. So we have, more than one incentive to stop at Neverlight Grove on the way. But before I get too ahead of myself there, let's talk about where things went last time. So if you recall, in our previous session, the characters had kind of done away with what looked to be a cult to Demigorgon in the Whorlstone tunnels underneath Gracklestug, and they learned that this cult was performing rituals on the stone giants that populate part of Gracklestug, causing them to go insane and grow second heads and all that kind of good Demogorgon stuff. Excuse me. And so they defeated what appeared to be one of the cult leaders, or the cult leader there. They got some interesting treasure from searching around, and of course pieces to the puzzle. And then their objective was, they had also captured Droki, which was part of their quest, or a couple of their quests really. And so their objective at that point, they said, well, look, this has been a real struggle down here, and we're really feeling it. But they did get a long rest in after this giant combat, and then they said, the next priority is to get out of here. We should leave. We should leave the Whorlstone tunnels. The problem is they didn't really have any problems navigating the tunnels before, because they were tracking Droki. We had the half-orc barbarian by the name of Bard, who was tracking the steps with his survival skills. And the player rolled flawlessly almost every single time. So there was never an issue of them backtracking on themselves or taking a wrong turn. They progressively followed Droki all the way until they found him at this cultist place. But now that they had Droki, and it was more of a case of, well, okay, where do we go now? Well, now it's like, okay, well, do your checks, and there was a few checks that was failed, and ultimately they wound up taking a few wrong turns and wound up in unfamiliar tunnels, and eventually, they got lost. So that's, I think, where we kind of had ended off the previous session. So now in our last session that we played, what had happened was they said, okay, well, we're going to go this way, and ultimately it led them to a spot where they found this room that was like a giant pit, that had kind of like defensible spikes going outward to stop things from climbing up out of the pit. And there was a singular Darrow guard with a crossbow. The pit was all filled with mist, but they could kind of see figures moving around. And what this area actually was a dumping ground for corpses. And those corpses had risen into zombies that were kind of like mulling around in the mist, and just the Darrow guard was... So the players wound up killing the Darrow guard, and then kind of looking down, and our warlock player sent his familiar in to look around, and they noticed the zombies, and they thought, well, Let's not say we did. So they just kind of turned around and left that room, and which is fine. I mean, really, it would have just been a combat with, I think, maybe 8 zombies of 2 different varieties, kind of 4 of each, which is fine. I don't care. The only thing that was kind of unfortunate about it is, if you recall, when they very first entered the Whorlstone tunnels, they had encountered Bapido again, and he had this big nasty flesh golem that they fought and everything. And when they had defeated him, there was this ghost that rose up out of the ground of this deep gnome who had been recently murdered by Bapido, and he kind of told the characters who he was, and he said, you guys would be doing me a huge favor if you could find my family's signet ring and bring it back to my family in Blingdenstone. That would help, my spirit to rest. And the characters were like, yeah, well, if we see it, we'll let you know. Where is it, though? And he said, well, it was here, but, the dark magic that infuses this place kind of animated my severed hand, and it just kind of crawled off with the ring. Now, if they had further explored this room, they would have found that animated hand with the ring on it. But they chose not to, so he will never be at rest, I suppose. So after they spun around and they went further north into the tunnels, and this kind of led them to, I guess, what you would call like a final showdown area, a secondary boss room, you might say. And this boss room was interesting. It was they came into an area that had a lot of different levels to it that kind of kept going up to a pavilion on 2 main areas that were linked by a wooden bridge. And on top, they could see what appeared to be another Darrow caster of some kind, standing next to a huge black obelisk that had chunks missing from it. And the mage was kind of touching the obelisk and rubbing it, and something would happen, and then they would start cackling and writing things down. So clearly experimenting with this obelisk. And what the players didn't know at that point in time is that there was a spectator that was hidden above the mouth to that cave where they would be walking in, on like a hidden ledge. And a spectator, for those of you who are not familiar, you might know the term beholder, which is a D&D very nasty monster, a floating head with 1 eye and a huge mouth and eye stalks that just will wreck your day. Well, a spectator is like the junior version of that. It has less eye stalks, it can't shoot as many nasty spells, but it still it can be a very challenging opponent, because it flies around and just launches spells, and there's no AC really. It just forces you to take checks, and if you fail, nasty things can happen to you. So it was, the characters kind of saw this, and that was on one of these main high points, and the other point, connected by that wooden bridge, there was a pedestal with a huge egg on it. And if you recall, the Brotherhood of the Flame, or the Keepers of the Flame, who kind of manage the red dragon Themberchaud of Gracklestug, the Forge Father who keeps all the fires lit with his dragon breath. They had said, we only keep these dragons until they're no longer manageable through our psionic control. And then we basically kill them off once we have a new egg ready, and then we raise that dragon, do the same thing, and the cycle continues. But recently, the Grey Ghost, which is basically like an outcast thieves guild of Gracklestug, had stolen the egg, and here it was, this red dragon egg. So the characters are like, well, what's this weird obelisk? And there's that dragon egg, and we should kind of go take care of this lonely person and whatever. So they go forward, and as they do that, they get attacked by this spectator, who would fly just out of melee reach, whatever. And one thing I should note as well is, if you recall in our previous session, that my player Josh, his Tortle character had died, Uta, the Tortle monk, by basically falling prey to a fear spell, running away, and his huge amount of speed took him right into a trap area where he failed his dex save, and with 1 hit point left, fell into a pile of acid, essentially, which he then just proceeded to die in, which was unfortunate and completely random and by chance, but it happened. And so he came to the session with a new character, and it was fun the way, just before that boss room in the tunnel leading up to it, they encountered what's called a flumph, which is named after the noise it makes as it kind of like just floats through the air. But if you can imagine like a really strange looking jellyfish with 2 eye stalks and a mouth, a flump is like a friendly creature, and the flump basically is conversing with this new character that Josh brought to the table. And the flump kind of says to the characters like, "Oh, I'm so glad to see you here, and you're not the first adventurers I've met. Come meet this other person, and there's some really nasty stuff happening. There's a cult, and we have to stop them. And will you help me?" And the characters are like, "Yeah, this thing seems nice enough," and it introduced them to the name I'm not going to try and pronounce because it's a big long thing, but it was a gnome wizard, I think, or maybe no, I think it's a gnome sorcerer. Sorry, it's a gnome sorcerer. And so they met up, and the gnome sorcerer is great personality, great character. A huge departure from the character that Josh played as Utah. Not that it was bad, but this is a very interesting character as well. So they hooked up and they went into this fight. So as soon as they walked in, the spectator comes down and ambushes them, and they rolled initiative, and the fight started. And it was a good fight. It was difficult without being overwhelming. A lot of what the spectator does are things that will, paralyze or fear or confuse. It has one kind of direct damage spell that it used a couple times, and we kept it close. It was a little dicey. They did a really good job of shutting down the spellcaster up top. So long story short, they defeated both of these foes quite spectacularly, as the gnome sorcerer basically had his crossbow and twice rolled crits on the beholder, which was great because they didn't have a lot of ways to attack that beholder. The warlock threw a couple spells at it, but the spectator has an ability that basically can reflect spells back at the caster, and that happened once, and they really didn't like that. So at that point, they just left it up to the gnome, who would just kind of like take these pot shots and almost single-handedly, maybe it even was single-handedly, I don't quite remember, took down the spectator. So they defeated these enemies, they got their XP, and they learned a few more mysteries. They found out that the coins, like if you recall, there was a quest given to them by one of the guild members of the Warlocks Guild named Yilsa, and she had said, well, while you're here, there's this thing that's going on. I'm noticing all these different currencies that are from the surface world popping up in Gracklestugh, and I've traced it back to Darrow, who are trading them in for food. Figure out where these are coming from. And what they were noticing was that this pillar was like teleporting in random currencies from the surface world, and just like they were just appearing there. And then they found the red dragon egg, of course, and they looked, and it's huge. Like this red dragon egg is like 180 pounds and like massive. Like it would be massive. And so but the barbarian is quite strong and was able to successfully just lift the egg up and kind of carry it. And then what they found out is that anyone on the pedestal, when a spell was cast touching the obelisk, they were teleported to just outside the city gates of Gracklestugh. And so this was very surprising for them. And at first, one of the characters did it while no one was looking, and they just vanished. And I told that character, okay, you stay over there, you're gone. And they're like, what? Like, am I dead? And I'm like, no, you're just gone. Don't worry about it. We'll get back to you. And then the other character's like, where did so-and-so go? And wasn't he just over there? And so they all wandered over, and they all teleported out, which I'm happy, because with only 2 spellcasters of a 5-party crew, with one of them already gone, they could have easily wound up in a situation where 1 or 2 people were like stuck in the Whorlstone tunnels, having to manually find their way out, and that would have been just a nightmare. So I'm happy that they kind of figured it out and worked it out and got back. And so upon returning to Gracklestugh, they visited the appropriate places. They went back to Yelsa and said, hey, this is where the coins are coming from. They went back to Erde Blackskull and said, here's Droki, and here's what we've learned, and there's this cult that's going on. And she's like, yes, all this makes sense, thank you so much. I'll follow up on my word. You have free exit from the city, free of being hassled by these drow that were after you or whatever. And with the dragon egg, they had a choice to make. They could either give the egg to the Keepers of the Flame and say, all is right now, or they could follow through with Themberchaud's request, which was, report to me first, and which would have meant they would have gone and said, you're being psionically controlled. They mean to replace you with this, egg and that kind of thing. And they opted for the latter. And so they kind of did tell the Brotherhood of the Flame, or the Keepers of the Flame, had like a secondary task, which was, figure out where all the magical disturbance is coming from. And they said, well, there's this black obelisk down there, and whether it made sense to them or not, like the Keepers of the Flame just hate the Grey Ghost at this point, and with some of the kind of creeping insanity that's happening in Gracklestugh due to the Demogorgon roaming around, they were just basically like, yes, obviously that obelisk is the source of their power, and thank you for kind of getting rid of them and shutting them down. So they were pleased with that, and they said, well, did you find the egg? And they were like, oh, no, we didn't. We didn't find an egg. And they're like, oh, okay, well, hopefully you keep looking for it. They passed their deception checks and whatever. So then they went to see Themberchaud, and they basically told him, yes, you're being sonically controlled, and this is what they do, and there was this egg, and we found the egg. And he's like, oh, well, you should give me the egg then. And they were like, well, how are we going to do that? We can't, you're behind all the... And he said, don't worry about it. I'll meet you at the docks, kind of thing. And then they were like, well, won't it be weird? Like, I was like, no. You guys are surfers. You're not from around here. It's not exactly uncommon for the people of Gracklestugh to see me around the city, because I go on my rounds and make sure all the forges are lit. It might be slightly strange that I'm appearing at the docks, but, that's not completely unheard of. Might get a couple stares, but no one's going to be calling the guard or anything. So they said, well, okay, hopefully we can trust you. And as a reward, he kind of gave them a couple interesting potions from his dragon hoard that he's always kind of like just laying around and sitting in. And I can't remember exactly what they were, but I think it was a potion of youth or something that would like de-age a character by 2d4 d4 years times 10 or something. I can't remember what it was, but I think that they got that, and the characters were a little disenchanted with that. I think they were looking for something more immediately useful, but hey, you never know, something like that could come in handy down the line. So they have this potion, and they go back, and they had stashed the egg kind of like under blankets at their inn that they were staying at. So they go and retrieve the egg, and they go to the docks, and Themberchaud meets him there, and he grabs the egg. He's like, oh, you've done me a great service. And he just kind of crushes the egg in front of them because he doesn't want anyone to take his position. And then he kind of like, the goop kind of is coming off his fingers, and he's, just playing with it a bit. And he says, you've earned the favor of a dragon kind of thing, and then he kind of takes off. And that's where it was. That's kind of where we ended off the session, so that they're at a point now of being ready to leave. I asked them, I don't remember if they gave me a straight answer, but I don't know if they're going to continue traveling along the Dark Lake, or if they're going to, hoof it on foot and go that route. But they have decided that Neverlight Grove is their next stop, and then from there to Blingdenstone. So when we kind of resume, it'll be them deciding where they want to go, and I'm hoping they're going to give me some of that information beforehand, obviously, so I can do appropriate preparations. But either way, Neverlight Grove is going to be really fun. I've been looking forward to doing that zone, so I'm glad that they're finally going there next. It's going to be really cool. So yeah, that's where we are so far. I know it's a bit of a shorter recap today. Part of that is because I'm struggling to remember everything that happened 2 weeks ago. Part of that's because I'm a little bit strapped for time right now, but I'm happy that I was able to get some time in to do this video and kind of keep you with bated breath as to when we'll play next, probably in a couple weeks. And you'll get to hear all about the myconids of Neverlight Grove and anything that's going on there, and what the players will encounter next. So hope you enjoyed, and as usual, we'll see you next time on DM's Journal.